In 2005, Sony gave us the PSP, opening up a whole new world to handheld gaming. Over multiple generations, the PlayStation Portable, as it was known, would sell over 80 million units, offering the first real competition to Nintendo's previously unrivaled DS line of handheld consoles. 2011 introduced Sony's long-awaited follow-up to the PSP, Enter the PlayStation Vita stage right. This is the second episode of a new gaming series from Untitled, focusing on some of the most intriguing and interesting stories from its decades-long history. The first one focused on Sega's ill-fated Dreamcast console, and you can find that video in the description or the playlist on the channel's front page. Welcome to Dead in the Water. So, let's get hands-on with the Vita then. In terms of design, it really continues where the PSP had left off, offering something kind of ahead of its time actually, with a modern design that doesn't really look out of place even in today's standards 9 years later. With a 5-inch OLED screen, the display is certainly sharp for 2011 and even by modern standards when comparing it to some phones. It remains one of the most infinitely comfortable consoles to hold, with 2 analog sticks and shoulder buttons, along with a D-pad and traditional PlayStation buttons of X, O, triangle and square. To me, at least, when the Vita launched 9 years ago, it looked a lot more modern than the competing DS variants at the time, which would have been either the DSi, DSi XL, and later the 3DS. In terms of modernity, it continues when you find out that the 5-inch OLED screen that the Vita used was touch-sensitive, much like the phones and tablets of the time, as well as it featuring 2 cameras and a second touch-sensitive pad on the console's reverse, which is certainly rather shiny. At the same time, Nintendo had launched the 3DS, and both consoles featured 0.3 megapixel cameras that operated at similar resolutions. With the Vita, there was even support for an early variant of augmented reality, thanks to a selection of cards that came bundled with the console upon release. Where the Vita would, in my eyes at least, win against the 3DS of the day would be in overall design. Compared to the 3DS's quite clunky looking clamshell, the Vita is a lot more sleeker, and to my eyes anyway, a much better looking console. But to be honest, where the Vita would lose out is that more people would flock towards the 3DS due to its stereoscopic no glasses required 3DS capabilities that seemed fascinating at the time. For a handheld console released at the dawn of the last decade, the graphics offered up by the Vita weren't necessarily half bad, and to be honest, it certainly stands up to today's crop of handheld consoles and gaming phones. And when it came to game selection, the Vita excelled initially with an eclectic mix of high-profile titles such as iterations of both the FIFA series, FIFA 12, and Call of Duty, Black Ops: Declassified, as well as more indie-based arcade titles such as Top Darts, one of the console's more focused sports games. This was, at least until the back end of 2011 and the start of 2012, whereby the plethora of AAA titles from the likes of EA, Ubisoft and Activision wasn't enough to keep the console relevant, prominent, and keep sales booming, so therefore a change of tack was needed. Shahid Ahmad, Sony's then Director of Strategic Content, decided to undertake a new direction and approach to gaming software. With an outreach program to developers used to PC and mobile titles underway for the Vita, the main focus of the console would move to smaller, lower budget titles, and hone in on the user base to make the Vita a pronounced specialist in indie titles. Games such as Hotline Miami and Spelunky certainly found successes with Vita releases. Sony's switch of attention did somewhat turn the console's fortunes around, but 2013 wouldn't end up being a landmark year for the Vita, with only moderate support from big developers such as EA providing the likes of FIFA 13, and Sony themselves providing a Killzone port and also Tearaway, one of the Vita's runaway successes. Despite this, the Vita's supported game selection didn't just end up with a load of indie titles, and moderate Japanese JRPG support since there was a handheld gaming boom at the start of the last decade in Japan, but it would actually end up supporting PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 titles through a system known as Remote Play. Personally speaking, I remember this being advertised in reaction videos to the PlayStation 4 being around, and at the time it seemed like a revolutionary idea, and Sony themselves stated that the Vita would appear vital to the PlayStation 4's successes, acting as a focal point for the console's development, not least helped by this Remote Play principle. Cloud gaming in 2020 is just beginning to get off the ground, with Google Stadia and Nvidia's GeForce Now appearing to lead the way. But back in 2013, the Vita's Remote Play seemed like space-age technology. There was even talk of VR support with the Vita acting as a second screen. But by 2015, as the PlayStation 4 had become a runaway success, the Vita had seemingly been forgotten about, and people had once again turned back to proper console gaming with the launch of a new generation. So what went wrong? As much as the Vita was hyped up before its initial release in 2011, it fell short of sales projections and expectations, not necessarily aided by the high price of the system compared to the 3DS, and also the increasing popularity of smartphones and tablets that could be seen to signal the beginning of the end of handheld gaming as we know it. Somewhat ironically, at the same time as the Vita, Sony had launched an Xperia phone specifically designed for gaming, quote, the Xperia Play, that picked up from where the PSP Go had left off in terms of design. The Vita was, much like the Dreamcast we featured earlier, the victim of a changing technological world. Looking back on it now, it seems and even is a revolutionary console, not least with remote play functionality and support for AR, but to its contemporaries, the Vita just seemed a little bit too far ahead of its time. Compared to nowadays, it seems impossible that developers and consumers could have taken advantage of all the features that the Vita had to offer. And to be perfectly honest, it acts as a great way of looking back on past technologies and seeing how Sony with its release could ultimately predict the future, although no one really realised it at the time. And all that remains to be said is that if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel. And make sure to ring the notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads of either this series or any of the product reviews that are featured on this channel from time to time. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram and check out the blog as well. Make sure to sign up to the newsletter. Links will be down below. And if you like any of the kit that we feature on this channel in terms of video reviews, you can find Amazon links in the description to all those videos where you can pick it up. So thank you very much for watching.